Shana Tova, everybody. A man once brought very fine material to a tailor and asked him to make a pair of pants. When the man came back a week later, the pants were not ready. 2 weeks later, still not finished. Finally, after 6 weeks, the pants were ready and the man tried them on. They fit perfectly. He felt wonderful in these pants. I mean, these were the best trousers that had ever been made. And nevertheless, when it came time to pay, he couldn't resist a jibe at the tailor. And he says, it took God 6 days to make the world, and it took you 6 weeks just to make one pair of pants? Aha, the tailor replied. But look at this pair of pants, and look at the world. This is one of the most difficult moments in Jewish history that I have lived through. I look at the world, I look at the wars that Israel's fighting, I look at the hostages remaining in Gaza, the continuing rise in anti-Semitism, and I feel a profound sense of loss and anxiety. Judaism helps us through these times of pain, of loss, of change, by accepting difficult realities and blessing life nonetheless. Look, this Jewish year was a hard one for me personally, for the Jewish people in general. And there were a lot of days where I felt like I really wasn't okay. I wasn't okay learning what happened on October 7th. I wasn't okay all of those days glued to the news. I wasn't okay watching anti-Semitism rise viciously in academia and on college campuses. And I wasn't okay when I learned, surprise, I had kidney cancer. I wasn't okay after I had my kidney amputated, because removed sounds like, you remove a Band-Aid, but you don't remove an internal organ. I wasn't okay when fatigue or nausea took over my body. And despite that, I'm remarkably good. I'm okay. My life is beautiful. My community is supportive. I continue to be cancer-free. I'm receiving the best medical treatment in the world for my condition. And I'm almost halfway done. Yeah, thank you. I have about 6.5 months left of treatment, but who's counting? But that's the halfway mark. So I want to tell you a story about a colleague of mine, a rabbi who suffered a heart attack. It was really severe. He was confined to a hospital for several weeks, and the synagogue's president paid him a visit and said, I want you to know, Rabbi, that last night our board of trustees voted a resolution wishing you a speedy recovery, and it passed 12-9. Thank you for your good wishes, everybody. Thank you for the donations and for the meals, and thank you for the grace of allowing me to work part-time for a year, which means that I'm absent a lot. An enormous and special thank you to the Temple Beth Shalom Executive Committee and Board of Trustees, who have never once voted a resolution, who have really been just so gracious to me. And to Temple Beth Shalom Office Manager Beth Gerlich, and especially to the Ritual Committee, who have just all stepped up tremendously. An enormous thank you to Marilyn Arsham, who has taken over leading Friday night services. Thank you. And to the Friday night regulars, I miss you terribly, I do. And Lynn Michaels, Bernice Guest, and Ari Sampson have taken on running Shabbat morning services, and really taken the pressure off me, so thank you. And the Ritual Committee just pulled together to say, how are we going to make high holidays happen? And let me personally take up as much space as I can in the constraints that I have, and I'm so very grateful. In addition to Lynn and Bernice and Ari, thank you also to Eddie Lappa, especially, and Laura Plotnick, who are stepping in and helping to run the show today and tomorrow. And I'm just so deeply grateful for your support and for your blessings as I navigate health challenges that are, they're never expected, right? But certainly unexpected. Knowing that there's a community that has my back means so much more to me than I can express. In the Exodus story, the Egyptians faced 10 plagues, and each of the plagues gets progressively worse than the one that preceded it, which makes the 9th plague seem completely out of place. Because plague number 9 was 3 days of darkness that afflicted only the Egyptians. And darkness is annoying, but it's not that bad, right? So the Torah tells us, though, that this was a special kind of darkness. This was a darkness so thick a person could not rise from their place or see another. Darkness so thick we couldn't rise, the Egyptians could not rise from their place or see another person. And Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Alter explained why this plague was so terrible. And he wrote, "The deepest darkness is when a person cannot even see their neighbor and therefore can't join them in their suffering and their pain. Once a person no longer feels their neighbor's pain, it renders them completely impotent." The absence of empathy is what the 9th plague was, and it is severe indeed. Jewish tradition urges us to witness the pain and suffering of others, even when it's inconvenient. In temple times, the 3 pilgrimage festivals, Sukkot, Passover, and Shavuot, were the times when the regular Jews showed up at the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. In fact, interesting side note, Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur were largely holidays observed only by the priests to get ready for the big holiday of Sukkot. So we'll see you in a couple weeks at the Sukkah for the big holiday, but that's a digression. So tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people ascended the Temple Mount, and they entered the courtyard of the Holy Temple, and they came in on the right side, and they circled clockwise and exited through a different door on the left side. So there was a traffic pattern, if you will. But the Mishnah teaches us that there was a different path for those who were brokenhearted. They entered through a door on the left and circled the other way, leaving through the right side. And every time a person passed someone who was going the wrong way, they were required to ask, "Why do you walk the path of the grieving?" And every person who walked against the grain shared their responses, and the Mishnah tells us these were them. "I'm in mourning. I'm worried about a loved one who is sick. I have lost something important, for example, a job or a house. I've been ostracized by my community." And those walking the regular way offered each person an individual blessing. They blessed the brokenhearted with comfort, with healing, or acceptance. The blessings acknowledged the pain of those walking against the grain and offered hope for those who had perhaps lost all hope. The people who were hurting walked against the current. They were not invisible or shamed. They were seen and supported by their larger community. The benefit of being seen and accepted in our pain, of not having to pretend, is enormous. And it fascinates me to think about those who were on pilgrimage. How many of those who walked the regular direction were those who had previously walked against the grain, who had been on the path of the grieving in the past? I imagine they became aware that, we don't stay out of step forever. And I imagine those who had never walked the path of the grieving, and at this holiest place during holy time, they witnessed people in emotional pain, and they understood that suffering is part of life. If they hadn't walked against the current on the path of the grieving, well, at some point their lives would bring them there. Being human means that pain and suffering are simply part of life. We hurt, we fail, we go off track, we worry and fret, and we let people down. And on these high holy days, Jewish tradition does not allow us to pretend otherwise. So let's not pretend. This year has been incredibly challenging for the Jewish community. The October 7th massacre in Israel has left us profoundly shaken. The continuing rise in anti-Semitism around the world and right here in America frightens us, it unsettles us. And hearing university presidents debate the nuances of whether death to the Jews is protected speech, well, it leaves me speechless. The potential of a wider war with Iran is frightening. And that's to say nothing of the invisible pains that so many of us carry. We found a lump, or are facing bankruptcy. We miscarried, we're ending a marriage. We've been betrayed, or are paralyzed by depression. We grieve, we hurt, we worry, we suffer privately, and publicly we plaster a smile on our faces. And if only we could say, I don't feel okay. Something inside of me has broken. I feel shattered. If only we could walk a path of grieving to be seen in our suffering and our pain and blessed that we will find wholeness again. There's a Charlie Brown comic where Charlie has lost yet another baseball game, and he says, good grief, I get tired of losing. Everything I do, I lose, right? Poor Charlie. And Lucy says, hey, look at it this way, Charlie Brown. We learn more from losing than we do from winning. Charlie shouts at Lucy, that makes me the smartest person in the world. Look how smart we all are, right? I mean, this year has felt like a year of loss for me personally. I know for many of us, right? It's a loss not just of my health and my energy, a loss of a feeling of Israel's security, continued loss of our own feelings of security in the Jewish community. This year, as a Northern Westchester and Putnam Jewish community, we had to cancel our annual menorah lighting at the Jefferson Valley Mall because it was too difficult to secure the site, right? And that likely isn't coming back. I mean, what a huge loss. A few weeks after October 7th, a Mahopac man named Shaul Naor came out of the woodwork. His sister had been murdered on October 7th. His niece and her young daughters were at the time hostages. They were freed in November, but his brother-in-law, Gadi Moses, well, who knows? He's still a hostage. He's 79 years old. We don't know his fate. At Temple Beth Shalom this year, we adopted a hostage named Ron Sherman. And we had a seat, the bima actually reserved for Ron. And for weeks in particular, we prayed for this sweet, sweet young man, 19 years old, asthmatic, working with Gazans to export food and goods that were produced in Gaza for sale, for economic prosperity. And when the news came of Ron's death, it was awful. Tears filled my eyes as I removed the talit and the siddur from the seat that was reserved for him. The murder of 6 hostages at the end of August, including American citizen Hirsch Goldberg Pollen, brought with it, for me, a loss of hope. Poor Hirsch, with his arm blown off, and his warrior parents who spoke and led with love, loyalty, and kindness, who were such a beacon of light. And as Israel pounds its enemies, Hamas and Hezbollah use their own civilians as human shields. They house rockets and drones in homes and schools and hospitals. A friend of mine, her daughter made Aliyah. The daughter's boyfriend is serving in the IDF, and it's his unit's job to find the rockets that are hidden under children's beds and the guns under kids' beds in Gaza. And despite this, the loss of life and property in Gaza and in Lebanon is a tragedy. Even if we view the death and destruction to be a necessary evil, Jews do not harden our hearts at human suffering. In the Exodus story, when Pharaoh's army drowned in the Sea of Reeds, the Midrash tells us that God scolded the angels who rejoiced. Because God's children, the Egyptians, had died and were suffering, we do not celebrate other people's pain. Look, Israel's become a partisan issue in America. And Lord knows our political system, it's severely dysfunctional. It seems like we've broken with our Jewish tribe and hunkered down into political tribes. We shout sound bites at each other, and we shout them into the ether, right? Like, is anybody even listening when we shout what we feel so deeply? And we entrench ourselves ever more tightly into our positions, so let's stop that. This is the time of year for us to look inwards and to challenge old ways of thinking. And so to those on the political left, those who feel betrayed right now, I see you. I see your loss and your suffering, and I see your compassion, and I gently challenge you. what is a fitting reaction to evil? What is a fitting reaction to the gang rapes and beheadings and murders and kidnappings and destruction of October 7th? When grandparents and babies are set on fire and burned to death beyond recognition, how are we supposed to react? What is a person to do when the choice is to kill or be killed? We have made such great efforts on the left to cultivate compassion and understanding. But what does it mean to us when those are not appropriate responses? These are questions for you to wrestle with. Judaism helps us navigate complex terrain. Jewish tradition teaches that there are just wars. And in certain circumstances, we are actually required to wage war. Certainly, we hold the prophetic vision, nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn any war. We hold that up, we cling to it at times. But Ecclesiastes also taught that a season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for killing and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for war and a time for peace. There was a ceasefire with Hamas on October 6th. After October 7th was not the time for peace. Judaism also teaches that when a person or a people have murderous intentions, they must be stopped, even if that means killing them. Self-defense is actually, in the Torah, a mitzvah. And so ask yourself, what is it inside of you that resists this idea? Look, self-defense does not mean that we rejoice in the death of our enemies. Rather, it is a recognition of the messiness in the world. And to those of you on the political right, you're not off the hook either. Here's my gentle challenge for you. Even if we put aside any doubt about the justness of this war, presume that every single action taken by Israel and its army is with zero uncertainty justified. Even with all of that, there is blood on the hands of the Jewish people. Innocent people, young children, have been killed by the Israeli army. Innocent people have lost their homes. They have lost everything. What must be done to restore the wholeness of our souls? How do we live with having caused inordinate amounts of pain and destruction? How do we hold on to our own humanity in the face of evil? These are your questions. In times when the temple still stood, when a person came in contact with a corpse, that person was rendered ritually impure, no matter how the person had died. And there were extensive rituals that were performed to regain spiritual balance and to be able to re-enter into the community. War leaves people spiritually misaligned. This is the time of year where we do tshuva, repentance or return. This is when we recognize that our actions and our behaviors and our speech have a spiritual effect that often must be countered. Even unintentional harm that we have caused requires personal reflection. It requires taking responsibility and seeking to make amends. And if you hear this and you bristle at the idea that we have blood on our hands or that we have to make teshuvah because of this war, well, then ask yourself why. What is it inside of you that rejects or dismisses that idea? Danielle Hartman, who's the director of the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, wrote about this current war. We Israelis have a moral right and a responsibility to self-defense against the evil that threatens us. But the idea of a just war includes the responsibility to fight that war justly, to do everything in one's power to avoid and limit civilian casualties, to kill only to defend a nation's security and not for vengeance, to pursue war as a last means, and to bring it to a conclusion the moment one's rights are secured, or when fighting another day will not result in furthering these rights, or when the cost to civilians is greater than the projected benefits to society in security. And he continues, I don't know whether the extent of death and destruction in Gaza are disproportionate to the war's aims, and I'm not arguing that now is the time for a ceasefire. I'm arguing for the need to constantly question ourselves, to encourage internal criticism, and embrace the imperative to fight a just war justly. Hartman concludes, "It may be our destiny that the time to kill will never fully end. It may be our destiny to live always between the time to kill and the time to heal. If so, let us embrace the totality of its challenges and moral responsibilities." Look, it takes courage to grapple with our beliefs and to question ourselves, to walk against the grain, to challenge the party line. We need inner strength to question conventional wisdom. It takes courage to recognize that those on the left and those on the right both have valid points. The sound of the shofar echoes our internal experience. I was whole. I was broken. I was utterly and completely shattered. I will be made whole again. This is a time of brokenness, of being shattered. At least for the next couple days, let's not run away from that. Let's not avoid it. That's the gift of these days. Sometimes when faced with inner pain, we have excuses to turn away, right? I can't be shattered. I have to make dinner tonight. I don't have time for brokenness. I have to go to work. My kids need me. My mom needs me. This has to happen, et cetera, et cetera. I've got homework, on and on and on. Or if we're being really honest, we might say, this hurts too badly to look at, so I'm just going to look at my phone. Wholeness comes on the other side of facing pain head on. We don't have to stay shattered forever. Remember those who walked the path of the grieving in temple times. They received recognition and blessings from their community. And they eventually rejoined those walking the normal way, forever changed, perhaps changed for the better. Because remember, it's those cracks inside of us that let the light shine in. This is the time for us to see one another as brethren. Let's not allow our differences of opinion to blind us to each other's humanity. This is the time for us to support Jewish college students, to see them in their struggles on campus. This is a time for us to come together as a Jewish community, not to be splintered farther apart. Despite what politicians might say, we're not a special interest group. We are Am Yisrael. We are a Jewish people. Elie Wiesel survived Auschwitz and Buchenwald concentration camps, and he taught that when faced with difficult circumstances, we have three choices: resignation, right, giving up; delusion, pretending it's not happening; or the most difficult and the most beautiful, facing it head on. The Jewish way is not to give in to despair, but to transform it into hope. In Elie Wiesel's words about a Simchat Torah celebration held in Auschwitz, we had to rejoice and let the world know that Jews can sublimate pain and agony and draw new reasons for hope from despair. Am Yisrael Chai. The Jewish people live and will continue to struggle and to thrive. May you find blessing and hope and wholeness. For those who walk against the grain this year, may you find your way back to the path of the whole. May this be a year of good health and laughter and joy and so many blessings that you can't even count them, but please keep trying. I wish you a Shana Tova, Umetuka, a happy, a healthy, and a sweet new year. Shana Tova.